393. We'll get to those coming up, but right now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Ron Paul. How are you, sir?
Doing well, thank you.
So, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I was fascinated by your Chevy Chevette story. Now, first of all, you have a Chevy Chevette and you're auctioning it off.
Right.
For what reason are you auctioning it off?
Well, one thing is I never thought I would ever keep the car for so long. It got to be sort of one of those things of procrastination. I didn't want to just give it away because it had a special significance, a political significance, in that I used it back in the 70s when we had these energy crises. I bought a Chevette because it was considered to be more economic than others, and we had gasoline lines and gasoline prices going up. At the same time, I was having trouble getting gasoline and trying to economize. Tip O'Neill and others were driving these huge cars in Washington, so that was annoying to me. So I parked my car next to Speaker O'Neill's car and then put it in my postal patron and sent it around, which really, to point out, the difference. And it angered all the Republican leadership, so they thought that what they would do to punish me would be to take away my benefits from my district, which wasn't, the best thing for me, but it wasn't the reason I was in Washington, so I wasn't too disturbed by that. But it was just making a point. So when I left Congress in '84, we kept it for a while, and the kids used it in college, but it never was used that much. And then it just sat in the garage for a long time. I said, well, my car shouldn't sit here. Maybe somebody would take it. So I thought, well, if I could raise a couple of dollars for my foundation, I'm going to do it. And so I decided to just stick it out there on Facebook and see what happens.
Yeah, because that was my question. Okay, I understand why you have a Chevy Chevette. I mean, my family had one, and I learned to drive a Chevy Chevette back in the day, too. They were real economical, but I didn't know why you still had one, but now that makes perfect sense. Tell me more about this, the parking it next to Tip O'Neill. That is what I'm fascinated by, Dr. Paul, is that the Republicans would be upset with you for that. Why? Is that part of you weren't doing the political dance?
No, back then there weren't very many Republicans in the 70s especially. When I was first elected, I think there were 145 Republicans. The rest were Democrats. Wow. That was in 1976. It was the end of right after Watergate. So it was Tip O'Neill that was the one that was upset, and Jim Wright, who was from Texas. So it was the Democrats. So I was making fun of the Democrats.
Okay. But Tip wasn't real happy there, and here he is, playing, I'm sure, the man of the people. He's the progressive, and he's driving around a Lincoln.
Yeah, we've heard that story before. All those poverty-ridden Democrats who are preaching this, and they protect their wealthy friends as well, if not better than the Republicans do.
Dr. Paul, I'm really frustrated by that, and I think that's a sense that most Americans are frustrated by that right now, even the people who vote Democrat. But why don't they know? Why don't they know the truth?
The people, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, I guess they're in denial. They don't want to know. If they do, they just suppress it, because they believe it when Nancy Pelosi gets up there and all the Democrats that we care. And I think it's the Republicans' fault, because I think they do a lousy job, because they're not very consistent either, because they come across as protecting of corporate interest. Mm-hmm. So they lose the PR game. And I think the basic reason is libertarians and conservatives have never done a good job in coming across about caring for other people. And Democrats can, brag about they care, we'll spend money, deaths don't matter, we'll give everybody a house, we'll give everybody free medical care. And when the country is doing reasonably well and the bankruptcy is not apparent, they get away with this. So if Republicans say, well, we want to cut back, they never explain that, if you really care about people, the basic thing you would do is protect their liberties and free up the market, and then maybe we would have jobs and prosperity. And it's been said for a long time. Mises, the great Austrian economist, explained that, big government and welfareism and inflation will destroy the middle class. Well, the middle class kept growing in the early years when we were so prosperous. But now the evidence is out there. We should have an easier time making our case. But I think on the long term, we never did a good job, because there were a bunch of us talking about the housing bubble and the NASDAQ bubble. But, people were still okay. Now, it took the bursting of these bubbles to people start paying attention to the Federal Reserve and different things like that. But up until now, the Democrats have had the moral high ground, pretending they cared about people, and we as libertarians haven't done a very good job in saying that if you really care about people, you ought to give them their freedom back and have them assume responsibility for themselves.
That's a great point. I think the Republicans lost their way by not being the party of personal freedoms. But to your point about not caring or coming across like you're caring, I think the other thing that's lost is the Republicans, conservatives, libertarians, whoever, saying what the answer is, aside from the freedom angle there, Dr. Paul, is that we as individuals, if we don't believe the government should take care of people, it's not their responsibility. That means it's my responsibility and yours as individuals to do that through charitable organizations and whatever else.
And people have been conditioned probably for more than 100 years. The government isn't there to protect liberty. The government there is to make a fair society, to redistribute wealth, tell us how to live, and to police the world. All the things that make no sense if you're looking at the Constitution. But people have come to believe this. So this goes back to where does the solution come from? And I think it comes from education. And the opportunity there is tremendous because the system is failing all around us. It's sort of like we proved communism didn't work, and nobody's preaching communism very much anymore. But this system is failing. But this is why we have to teach people that free markets and how they work and how the Federal Reserve works and why debts are bad, and make sure that we refute the Paul Krugmans of the world, and the Bernankes of the world. I mean, they're the ones who are in charge and say, that you have to do this. And actually, we're working to refute Keynes. Keynesianism is what we're still living with, but we're at the end stages there. So the solutions don't come by just electing 2 or 3 more people in Washington. It means that we have to get a whole generation of people to believe in themselves, to believe in liberty, believe in property rights. And that, of course, is the reason I go to the college campuses, to try to energize them in this direction.
We got this shutdown of the government right now, and so far, most of us are not affected by it. I mean, little things here and there, but it's not a big effect. When does that change? How long do we continue like this before we really start feeling pain, the average person?
Well, the whole thing is who's going to get blamed for what? When it starts to hurt, they'll change it. I think it'll be limited, but the market is vulnerable. We could have a stock market crash any time, and we could have breakout of inflation. And if it happens in a month from now, they'll blame the shutdown, but it might not be related to the shutdown. Then they use this. No, I think in the next few weeks they're going to come up with something, but it's all fear mongering and try to get a political edge at who gets the blame, because our government now does anything at once, anytime at once, and they don't care about the Congress, they don't care about the people. Attitudes are changing, but presidents basically go to war when they want. They print as much money as they want. They run up as much debt. If the Congress isn't moving along like Obama wants, he writes an executive order. And if we bailed out all the central banks in Europe, or not all of them, a bunch of them in Europe, as well as governments, to the tune of trillions of dollars secretly, without any approval by the Congress, you think they can't take care of the problems here? But what do? They close down, monuments and cemeteries and pretend that, the world is coming to an end so that they can get absolute everything in Obamacare, and then Obama refuses, I will not negotiate, and then we lose the argument, and then the Republicans are totally blamed for all the obstruction. I mean, they have their agenda, and I don't endorse all of that because nobody talks about cutting military spending. But it's pretty amazing. I would think Republicans, in running for an election, they should just take about 10 times the quotes of Obama. I will not negotiate. And now the Republicans are losing the PR fight. It's all the Republicans' fault for obstructing in Washington. But my argument is the obstruction comes naturally because we're bankrupt and they won't admit it. And that's why they're scrambling. They're fighting over a shrinking pie. The productivity is down, and that's the real problem we have. diminishing wealth and a diminishing middle class, and yet they don't talk about that because the deficit isn't the problem here. You know, it's a political argument on who's going to get blamed.
Because I mean, if we actually got serious, we could take care of the problem, but we're not doing it.
No, it's not likely to happen. Okay. Nobody's going to allow anything be cut off. You know, Republicans, are stuck. They're sticking together on Obamacare, but Republicans did their share of expanding the role of government in medicine.
Under George W. Bush, a whole new department, and I mean, it just grew it like crazy.
I hope that's the reason that the people are discussing with Congress, because both sides, demagogue these issues.
Well, we had today, Congressman. We had or yesterday it was leaked out some emails that show that Speaker Boehner was actually working for exemptions and subsidies for Obamacare for members of Congress and their staff, but then coming out and telling us no. So we get this email leaked, and it becomes obvious that Speaker Boehner he's not even doing what he says. Congressman, what?
Well, I'm not shocked. I think that's what happens all the time. Almost always, if you look at a bill and look at the title, or if you look, matter of fact, many headlines, or if you look at what a politician says, almost always it's the opposite. If there's a justification for going to war, okay, Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. Well, the likelihood of this being true is slim to none. If they tell lies and fibs about the economy, the unemployment rates are down to to a certain level, or inflation is only 2%. Well, it's all based on fiction and lies and deceptions. So I think I don't know how they can sleep at night, but there's a certain amount of arrogance that politicians develop the longer that they're there. They believe that it's proper for governments to distort the truth for the benefit of the people. It's called the noble lie. Governments are different. They have to take care of the people, and sometimes the people can't handle the truth. So therefore, we have to tell them these things. And so I'm not surprised when I hear a story about Boehner and others, but I think the blame can be spread around rather broadly. I do believe, though, that the exemption to this accusation should be some of these newer members and the younger members. But on both sides of the aisle there are several, but they basically don't have much control of things. The Democrats right now are saying, well, there's only 20 members of Congress who are Tea Party members sticking to their guns, and they're holding the whole country hostage. Well, I don't think that's the case. It isn't 20 Tea Party members who almost passed an amendment reining in NSA. That was because the people were upset. The people were upset about this potential bombing in Syria. That's what stopped that. It wasn't 20 Tea Party members taking over. Attitudes are changed by the people. That's the only way the government will change, is change the people's attitudes.
All right, take out your crystal ball, Dr. Paul, and tell me, how bad is this going to get in the future? I mean, we've seen a whole lot, mainly bad over the last 4 or 5, 10, whatever years. How bad is it going to get? I mean, we don't seem to be reversing it in any great measures.
Yeah. Well, on the very short term, the shutdown of the government and meeting the budget or the deficit, raising the deficit, those are glitches and there'll be problems. But the question you ask is when this really comes and really hits us. I think we're very vulnerable. I see this as we're a building with no foundation whatsoever, no foundation to our economic system, our monetary system. The foreign policy is deeply flawed, and the spending is totally out of control. I'd have a hard time believing that we can hold it together for another 5 years. But the calamity comes when the world rejects the dollar, loss of confidence in the dollar, and just in the last couple of days, of course, the dollar's gone down rather sharply. But when that gets out of control, interest rates go up and inflation goes up, and no matter what the government does or the Fed does, they can't control it. Because they might decide to cut back or something. The Fed might try to change their monetary policy, but it won't have any effect if confidence is lost. It works now because there's an illusion that we are wealthy still, we have a military power, and our dollar is the best currency in the world. And that used to be the case, but and the dollar still is a reserve currency. But when we lose the status of the reserve currency, we all of a sudden lose our ability to borrow, and that could come with an event in 6 months or 6 years. But
there's been a lot of countries that have actively worked and suggested it, and more are saying, yeah, let's take that away. Let's put it to China or somebody.
Oh yeah, I think it's there'll be something else. I sort of think that most of the time when currencies self-destruct, the only way they get confidence back is to link it to a commodity, such as gold and silver, and the people have to believe them. But nobody's on the verge of doing this, and that's why. The big bubbles are out there. The biggest bubbles, of course, is in our bond market. When you deal in prices, when interest rates are real low, the price is very high. And when interest rates are 0% and been that way close to 10 years or very close to 0%, that's a big bubble. And even now, it's up to the Fed to buy more and more of this. The foreigners are buying less, and so it's very precarious. And one thing I am absolutely convinced of: you can't pursue this forever. If this be the case, Americans would never have to work because we would have the currency, and all we have to do is keep printing it. We're doing $85 billion a month, and it doesn't seem to bother the markets. Markets, well, okay, they're worried it'll go to be if tomorrow the Fed said we're only going to buy $80 billion a month, the markets would get very nervous. So they're very fickle in that way. But we can't keep doing 85. I've heard predictions, and this is probably pretty logical. It will never, $85 billion purchases won't be replaced by $75 billion. It's more likely to be replaced with $100 or $150 billion a month just to try to keep things going.
All right, Congressman Paul, before I let you go, you've got to be tremendously proud of your son. That's got to be so cool as a dad to see your son doing so well.
Yeah, he sure is doing very well, and every day it seems like he's getting more attention. Some people give him attention in a negative way, but that means he must be doing something right. If they feel like they have to attack you, then you're making progress.
That's really cool. All right, Dr. Paul, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks. Good to talk to you.
I love that story about his car and Tip O'Neill. That shows you the what really goes on. Tip O'Neill, as Chris Matthews holds up, is this great leader of the small guy. Meanwhile, he's driving around that Lincoln. In fairness, it was one of the few cars that would haul around his massive girth. But still, he was pretending like he's a man of the people.
By the way, speaking of Chris Matthews and Tip O'Neill.